Good morning. So for today's assignment, we're going to be practicing Zentangle designs. Zentangles are something that have become really popular in the last couple of years. They can be a lot of fun to incorporate into your artwork in a variety of different ways. We're going to actually be practicing these because we're going to be using them in a lesson on 1-point perspective. So I'm going to break this up into two sections. We're going to start today with 4 patterns, and we'll learn 4 more later on. I'm going to start with ones that I feel are easier, and then we'll move into some of the more difficult patterns as we go. So what you're going to need for this assignment, you'll need a sheet of white paper. If you don't have white paper, you can use notebook paper because this is practicing the designs. An ultra fine point Sharpie, if you have one. I did send these home. A fine point Sharpie, a pencil, and an eraser. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I did actually was I took my sheet of copy paper and I folded it in half, okay? And I'm gonna fold that in half again. And I'm gonna fold it one more time. And that's gonna give us, when we open our paper back up, 8 squares, because eventually we're doing 8 designs, okay? So we're gonna start with 4 designs today. I'm gonna start with one called Static, and a lot of these designs are in a variety of different books. This one, I personally originally found this in the book called Zentangle Basics, but it may be elsewhere as well. So what we're gonna do is we are going to outline our box. If you have a ruler, go ahead and use it. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it to kind of define the space I'm working in. So again, this is optional. Okay, so I've defined the box I'm going to be working in, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So for the static, it's almost like a lightning bolt. So I'm going to go from the side, from the corner, and I'm just going to do a line. And I'm going to connect back up to that corner. So if you work with pencil, obviously you have the benefit of being able to erase if you're unhappy with a line. If you do it in Sharpie to start, you won't have that option. So as you're getting familiar with this, you may want to start with pencil. Okay, so the thing I'm going to do now is I'm thinking almost like a lightning bolt. I'm going from this corner and I'm going to come out and get wider. And then all I'm going to do is follow the outline of those original lines I put in. I'm going to make it more narrow as it comes out. And I'm going to adjust this, again, why I start with pencil, so that I can make adjustments if I don't like something. I am also pretty picky. I probably wouldn't have been bothered if I saw that on your paper. But I'm gonna fix it so it looks like that. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is I'll take my Sharpie and I'm gonna fill this in. And as always, you should pause the video as needed. I'm going to take my time when I color things in. I'm going to try and move in the same direction and go nice and slow so I get a nice solid color. This will matter on the presentation for your final assignment using Zentangle designs. You know, the practice one is practice. This is a time to practice proper technique. So now that I have that, I'm actually going to connect this, I think. We'll see. So the fun thing about Zentangles is you can adjust them as needed. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ultra fine point Sharpie, which is our skinniest Sharpie, and I am going to go just right in with my Sharpie. And all I'm going to do is outline around that shape. And I just continue to do that until I run out of space. Same thing on the other side now. Okay, so there we go. That's static design. Pretty simple, pretty basic. All right, so we're gonna start our next one here in just a second. Okay, so I'm gonna go back in with my ruler and I am going to outline my next box. And again, this is optional. I just like to go along the ruler with the Sharpie where the folds are, just to outline the space I'm working in. Okay, so for our next design, it's actually going to be pretty similar to what we just did. And this is called Charts. And again, this one comes from a book called Zentangles Basic. So what I'm gonna do is, again, I'm gonna work diagonally, only this time I'm gonna go from this corner to this corner. And I'm going to start by making a letter W, essentially. So pretty similar to how the last one started. I'm gonna turn my paper for a second while I do this. So I'm gonna come down, and I'm thinking about the letter W, and I'm just gonna come back up. Okay, and then I'm gonna outline that. I'm not gonna make it more narrow this time. I'm gonna keep it about the same width the whole way, or approximately. Does not have to be perfect. Okay. So for this one, now that I have that basic element outlined, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here again with my ultra fine point Sharpie, and I am going to outline the line I just drew. If you don't have a Sharpie, you could use a black colored pencil. You could use a regular black marker. Any of those things will work. If you don't have either of those, you could just use a regular pencil. Okay, so now again, I am just outlining the line again, keeping it at approximately the same width as the initial one. And again, I just keep going until I run out of space. Pretty simple. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take our thicker Sharpie, and we're going to use our Sharpie to color this section in. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to finish coloring this in, and when I turn the video back on, it's going to miraculously have been colored in the full way. Okay, so I went ahead and colored that in, and it's all done. I will tell you that as I was working, I made sure that I was moving my Sharpie in the same direction the whole time. And that's going to give you a neater appearance than if you're going this way and then that way and then this way. So I always try to move my marker in the same direction if possible. The other thing I did is I took my eraser and I went back in and erased the pencil line that might have still been showing from where I laid it out with pencil first. So these are all tips that you need to think about as you're doing your final presentation of your work. We know that the way your artwork looks matters. So those are tips to help you improve the quality of the presentation. Okay, so for the next one we're going to do, it's called rows and dots, actually. There are some other names for it out there, but I like to call it rows and dots. And it's going to start, again, we're going to be working on a diagonal, and we're going to start from this corner and move up to this corner. So for this one, we're going to sketch out a long line and another parallel long line below it. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to round this. And I do suggest that you start with pencil to lay this out. Okay, it's just going to make it easier for you than trying to do this with a Sharpie, which you know you can't erase. Okay, so I started with that. I'm going to repeat that process. I'm going to leave a little bit of space, and then I'm going to do another parallel diagonal line, trying to keep these approximately the same width or size, and then I'm going to curve these two on the bottom. So that'll obviously get erased because I'm working in pencil. I have that option. I'm going to come down here, lay out the next one. And you just continue basically until you run out of space for what I refer to as the rows. I'm going to come up here on the other side and do the same thing. Repeat the process over here. Okay, so then what I'm going to do next is put in my dots. So these are just going to be freehand. If you wanted to find a pattern and do them, you could. I am just going to freehand these with pencil. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to outline with my ultra fine point Sharpie. I don't want to use my thick one for this. I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. And I'm going to pause this, and you're going to see when I come back that I've outlined all of these pencil lines in ultra fine point Sharpie. Okay, so I've outlined everything with my fine point Sharpie. The next step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my eraser and I'm gonna go back in and erase all of my pencil lines, being careful not to scrunch up the paper or tear it when I'm erasing. So that's why I hold my hand flat on the paper and pull my eraser to the opposite side away. So I'm not pulling back in this way, I'm always pulling away to help it, to prevent it from wrinkling. Okay, so the next step is we're gonna go back in with our thicker Sharpie and we're gonna fill in the area around the dots and the rows. So again, we're gonna leave the rows, which would be this section, and the dots white. I'm gonna move in the same direction as much as possible when I color. It gets a little bit hard when we're doing things like circles. I'm gonna have to be very careful as we go through there. So you notice I slow down in those sections, outline around those edges, and fill that in. Okay, so I'm gonna pause this and again I'm gonna finish it and we'll come back and see what it looks like when it's done. Okay, so this one's just about done. I did want to show you how I went back in with an ultra fine point Sharpie just to clean up some areas that maybe I didn't love the way they looked after I used the larger Sharpie. So just to clean up some lines I was unhappy with. I'm very picky about my own artwork and very hard on myself, like some of you are. So I just wanted to show you this because I know there are some of you out there who are, you know, like me, and you're hard on yourselves. So these are not going to be perfect. I certainly don't expect them to be, but you can use this trick to make improvements and clean up edges as needed. It's important for you to pick up these tricks and have them available to you. So I'm going to show you this. And you're probably saying to yourself, Mrs. Hunt, that really didn't make much of a difference, but it makes me a little bit happier. So I'm going to show it to you. All right, so this one's done. And we're ready for our fourth one for today. And then we'll do 4 more in the next video. Okay, so this one's called squares. I am going to freehand these. If you wanted to use a ruler to draw them, you could. It's very time consuming to do it that way. So we're just going to freehand these and space these as equally as we can, just using our eyes to eyeball it. Okay, so I'm going to start again on a diagonal. A lot of these patterns are put on a diagonal. A lot of the designs, I should say, not all of them are patterns. And I'm just going to, and I would recommend starting with a pencil for this, sketch this in. And then I'm going to continue on that diagonal, sketching in my squares or rectangles, freehand, trying to space them evenly. Make sure you are leaving that border or space between them. You can try and keep them approximately the same size. It's okay if they're not. I would continue to go down this row. I'm going to pause it. We'll come back and we'll start the next row. Up this row, and I think it is important for you to see that the design is going to have to go off of the paper, and that's something you're going to have to get used to. So you're not always going to see the whole square, and if you stop the design, it's not as effective. So we're going to make sure it goes off the square, or out of this rectangle, I should say. Okay, so after this, all I'm going to do is leave some space, and I'm going to do another row of rectangles or squares, kind of using the one above it as a guideline as to where I'm placing my next one, trying to keep them on a diagonal, but leaving those spaces between them. Okay, so here we go off the page again. And I am just going to continue continue this process until this space has been entirely filled with this design. Okay, so we'll check back in here in a minute. Okay, so we've got that all sketched in now. So the next step is to come in with our ultra fine point Sharpie and begin outlining each of those squares. And these are not going to be perfect. They don't need to be. You do want to keep them relatively neat, but they don't need to be perfect. Once I have finished outlining these with my Sharpie, I'm going to go back in with my eraser and I'm going to erase any pencil line that's left behind. And then I'll show you the next step in this process. So I'm just going to go through and outline all of my squares that I drew, all of my rectangles with my Sharpie. Okay, we'll check back in a minute. Okay, so I have outlined everything. I've erased all my pencil mark to the best of my ability. Now I'm going to take this thick Sharpie and I'm going to start coloring those squares or rectangles in with this Sharpie, just slowly moving side to side. Okay, I don't want to go too fast because if I go too fast, there is a good chance I'm going to go outside of the lines. Okay, so we'll check back in a second and you'll see what the finished design looks like. Okay, so there's the finished design. I do want to point something out to you. I am working on top of a placemat. So as you can see, the Sharpie has definitely gone through my paper. So please consider working on top of a placemat that, you know, maybe nobody cares about, or taking a sheet of notebook paper and putting it underneath your assignment as you work. If you did get Sharpie on something, you know, and you need to clean it off, one thing that you can use if you have available is hand sanitizer to take it off of a surface like this, but please ask before doing that on top of a wooden surface as it might damage the wooden surface. Okay, so here are our first four. These were our simpler designs as we started, still pretty cool to look at, and we're going to move into some more complex designs in the next video. But this is the start for today. The hardest one for me was definitely the rows and the dots. For me, that was the hardest simply because the coloring is a little bit more challenging. Hopefully you enjoy doing these and you see that these can end up being really cool with some just very simple designs. Okay? All right, let's check back in the next lesson soon.